Welcome to Resilient. I'm Bill Marquard, Managing Director with Monitor Deloitte, and host of a new track which is aptly named for our rapidly changing world, Becoming Resilient. Resilient leadership is not a destination, it is actually a journey. It's a lifelong process of becoming. That is why Becoming Resilient was created. During our series, we explore wide-ranging topics, connect each to business issues, and I hope you'll be able to apply these insights to your own personal leadership journeys. In today's episode, we go into all that and more and connect the not so disparate dots between philosophy and business. I'm honored to welcome Dr. Tom Morris. With a PhD in both philosophy and religious studies from Yale, Tom's a self-proclaimed public philosopher with a calling and a passion to make philosophy accessible and applicable to everyone. He's spoken to over 1,200 business audiences. He's written over 30 books and most recently published Plato's Lemonade Stand, Stirring Change into Something Great. CEOs and other business leaders seek out his inspiration and using ancient wisdom, co-create new ways to be resilient in the face of disruption. Tom, welcome to Becoming Resilient.
Hey, Bill, good to be with you.
It's great to have you on the show. And in your honor, as a matter of fact, I'm wearing my Notre Dame Philosophy Department t-shirt that says, "Come with questions, leave with better questions." That'll capture the essence of what we're after today. So,
good.
Tom, the first question that we ask all of our guests, because this is Becoming Resilient, is how do you define resilience?
I've come to think of resilience as a lot more than just bouncing back. Typically, great resilience is more than that. It's about changing and adapting and learning and growing and being better than you were before. So I've come to think of resilience as something that when it's in the DNA of an organization, things go so much better.
So it's not just about recovering from risks or from crises, but it's also the opportunity that comes from being a resilient organization as well.
It makes people stronger. It makes organizations stronger.
There's a quote in the epigraph of your book from the Stoic philosopher Epictetus about 2,000 years ago that said, "What is philosophy? Doesn't it mean preparing to meet whatever will come our way?" And I'm going to channel my inner Epictetus and go through the 2,000 years and assume that Epictetus is posing that question to you. What is philosophy?
Oh, philosophy. I wish more people understood this. Philosophia, love of wisdom. I like to say this. An object of love is a very special thing. When you lack it, you pursue it. When you have it, you embrace it. Well, that's just what philosophy is. It's the pursuit and embrace of wisdom. And I understand wisdom is just insight for living well. So I think that's what Epictetus was talking about. He said, I used to be a slave, but so is everybody else. We're all enslaved to something. We're all chained down by illusions in life. I want to be your liberator. I want to set you free to be your best and to do your best. So to me, that's what philosophy always tries to do. It's liberation so that people can make the difference they're here in this world to make.
Right. And it said freedom to love wisdom is what it sounds like, to combine those two concepts together. You tell a fascinating story about first grade and discovering your passion for philosophy on the first day. Tell us a little bit about that.
I was 6 years old, never been to preschool, never been to kindergarten. Our wonderful teacher, Ms. Anders, she greeted the class graciously, and then she turned and wrote a sentence across the blackboard. And I remember to this day, over 60 years later, what it said: life is not what you want it to be. It is what you make it. And even at the age of 6, I sort of got a clue what she was talking about. I thought, why isn't it what we want it to be? And how do you make it something really great? So that launched me on the road to philosophy at the age of 6, and I've not been able to shake free yet.
What led you to the application of philosophy to other fields, especially business?
I was writing books and articles with all the great university presses, things that 37 people in the world could understand, really technical philosophy. And the Chamber of Commerce in South Bend, Indiana called me up and asked me if I could give a talk on ethics to a group of young business people. And rather than saying, well, I'm not the ethics guy at Notre Dame, you need to call somebody else, I said, sure, I'd love to do that. Short time after that, a car dealer in South Bend called me up and said, hey, we have this national convention and then we have this Midwestern convention. And, we'd love for you to come and give us a talk on success. We have motivational speakers all the time, he said. At our convention, we have speakers every year who basically say the same thing, set great goals, believe in yourself, you can do it. Is there anything deeper that the philosophers have said? I said, well, let me look into it. I don't know. And that launched an enterprise that has gone on now for over 30 years of my learning about life in almost every industry there is on earth and how the wisdom of the great thinkers can apply and make a huge difference.
In your most recent book, which I love the title, Plato's Lemonade Stand, Stirring Change into Something Great, you continue to take some of that ancient wisdom and apply it to today's issues and today's opportunities. So let's start a little bit with this metaphor of the lemonade stand that became the title for the book. What's that about?
Well, I grew up in Durham, North Carolina, and I must have heard 100 times as a kid. People say, when life hands you lemons, make lemonade. Tommy, when life hands you lemons, get ready to make some good lemonade. It made me thirsty, right? But I didn't really understand it at first. And nobody really said how. I mean, think about it for a second. This metaphor, lemons to lemonade, is pretty interesting. It means taking something that's sour and bitter and turning it into something delightful and refreshing. That's an approach to change that we all need. And so again, I was hearing this growing up. And then when a big company asked me once to give a talk on how to deal with difficult change, I remembered the lemons to lemonade metaphor. And I thought, okay, I'm going to go back and look at what the great philosophers had to say about how to do this. How can we take life's lemons, the difficulties, the adversities, the hardships, the unexpected setbacks, the failures we confront? How can we take those things and turn them into something delightful, something great? So it's about bouncing back, but it's about bouncing forward in such a rich way. It's about being transformative. I'm amazed at how much I learned. 15 years of research in finding out what the philosophers said about this and trying to put it into words that would reach people where they are in every walk of life, in every industry. And probably I've had more people tell me that book has made more difference in their lives and in their businesses than anything else I've ever done. So I'm thrilled to have been asked to speak about how we deal with challenges and to find all the wisdom that's been laid out there before us.
Right. Well, and that contrast between bouncing back and bouncing forward, I think, is really prescient, because it's that same idea between, do I want to get back to my status quo, right, or do I want to go beyond that and get to the opportunity? And the book really captures that essence very, very well. You use Plato, obviously, on the title, but one of the things I didn't realize until I read the book was how Plato himself is a model and a great example of resilience. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I draw from all kinds of great philosophers, East and West, in the book and throughout the centuries. But Plato has always been an example to me of transformative wisdom, because as a young man, he traveled to be with the teacher he wanted to learn from. And Socrates was his mentor. Socrates was his daily teacher. Socrates was really his best friend and his example about how to make a difference in life for other people using wisdom. And then all of a sudden, Socrates was brought up on false charges, sentenced to death, and executed for the very thing that Plato had been learning how to do. You can imagine how traumatic this must have been for the young man, Plato. He could have been distraught. He could have been despondent. He could have been despairing. He could have left Athens, gone into exile to flee this place that apparently hated the enterprise he had been trained in. But rather than that, he transformed the way philosophy was done and has been known as the source of all great Western philosophy ever since. That, to me, is an example of resilience at its best and being able to transform difficult circumstances into something amazing.
Right. Well, and in the book, Tom, I was fascinated that the word resilience and that term actually is one of the first terms that you really wrestle with in the book. And you talk about resilience and grit and alchemy. Mm-hmm. And I'd love for you to explain to the listeners what those three are, what the difference is, and how they all fit together in your book.
Yeah, there's this understanding of resilience. I call it like small R resilience, where it's just emotionally bouncing back, right? And a lot of people say, well, you got to do that. You know, when anything bad happens, you got to bounce back. But then in the last 10, 15 years, people started talking about grit or determination or persistence as being a key quality for not just individual, but organizational success through difficulties. Well, I discovered there's something in addition to small R resilience, in addition to grit. It's this alchemy, an ancient word used for radical transformation that we need to engage in so that we learn from our difficulties. We partner up with our problems and ask what they have to teach us so that we can do something often not just original, but revolutionary in the face of what would have defeated a lot of people. So in the book, early on, I want to grapple with these qualities, all of which we need, but to show how resilience and grit at their best point forward to something truly transformational.
You know, as we think about alchemy, we think about that idea of transforming lead into gold, which tended to be a fool's errand unless it was fool's gold, I guess.
Right.
Why did you use that term in the book, and why do you see alchemy being such a great metaphor and model for us as business leaders?
Yeah, it's funny because it's often said to mean the enterprise of trying to turn, base metals like lead into gold. And secondly, the enterprise of trying to turn ordinary lives into immortal lives. So the promise of alchemy was two things, right? Wealth and forever youth, the two things that people are still chasing. Underneath that, though, underneath the pursuit of gold and the pursuit of everlasting life was something really deep and almost spiritual. It was an effort to be transformative in the most fundamental ways possible. So alchemy becomes this metaphor for metamorphosis, this metaphor for the kind of changes that allow us as human beings to leap forward into new ways of doing things. So I picked up on those threads from the cord of alchemy through the centuries. I said, you know what it was always about? It was always about being transformative. That's what every business needs. That's what every one of us needs in our own lives. Let's learn how to do it together.
You have some fascinating stories that you mentioned in the book that were stories of resilience, like the microwave and a few other things that we didn't necessarily know the backstory. Could you just share with us a couple of those examples?
Yeah, one of my friends, he started a little store in Texas, and he was his dream come true. And there was a terrible flood, and he didn't have insurance, and it destroyed everything. But his customers, his neighbors, all showed up, and they started to help him clean the place up and fix it up. So it ended up being better than it was to start with. So what was, most people would say, well, this is a disaster. This is terrible. He ended up building one of the biggest businesses in the world after having survived that early disaster that people thought it was just going to take him down. There's so many stories like this. A band that was going to make the record, that was going to make their careers, and they found the perfect venue for the recording. And the night before the recording session, it burned to the ground. So rather than being despairing and going back home and just say, well, let's just give up, they wrote a song about the fire that became one of their big hit songs. And
that was Smoke on the Water by Deep Purple, right? That's right.
And, there's so many things, like a guy walks too close to some radar equipment and candy bar in his pocket melts, and he ends up trying to figure that out, and he invents the microwave oven. I mean, all these stories about failure and disaster and crazy bad things that happened to people where it made him curious, it made him think, it made him experiment, and it made him end up creating something great. So I started the book with a bunch of these short stories to give people this sense of how we can be creative in the face of, bad stuff. Nobody wants to have a melting candy bar in his pocket, right? Oh, that's ruined my pants. I don't know what I'm going to do. No, I'm going to invent the microwave. Well, if we could have more people thinking like that, I think the world would be a better place right away.
The book talks about two different, I'll call them movements, the art of change and then the art of innovation.
Yeah.
Can you share with the listeners some of the key lessons and the key wisdom from philosophers regarding the art of change and also the art of innovation?
Yeah, I see the art of changes involving two things. First of all, they're the changes that happen to us, right? That we didn't go looking for, we didn't expect, but they just happen to us. And we need to learn how to adapt and how to adjust and how to deal with that. Well, there's a second kind of challenge of change. And that's not the changes that come to us, but the changes that will happen only because of us, right? So we have to not just respond to change, we have to learn to lead change, to make change work. And so I divided the book into two parts. And the first half is the philosophical wisdom on how to adapt and adjust and respond well to the changes that come our way. And the second half of the book is like, okay, sometimes in even doing that, we have to lead new changes within our organizations. We have to make new changes within our lives. Well, there's a set of pieces of advice about how to do that. So the book encompasses, all the difficulties we face, the stuff that just comes our way and just drops out of the sky and, at our feet, and we've got to deal with it. And then the stuff that we see, we need to make some changes around here. Okay, how to make that happen, how to make that stick.
And let's talk about those in a little bit more detail. And you continue the metaphor of the lemonade stand a bit. Under the art of change, you talk about not fearing the fruit and handling the lemons. Give us some specifics. Assume that I'm the CEO or I'm in the C-suite of a major organization. It's trying to rebound from what's happened during the pandemic. And I want to apply your principles and your lessons and those lessons from Plato to how I end up transforming my own business. Give us some of those nuggets of wisdom.
The philosophers had some great advice. First of all, don't rush your judgment. Whenever anything unexpected happens that doesn't obviously look like it's a good thing, everybody says, oh, woe is me. Oh, no, what are we going to do now? If handled right, hardly anything is the worst thing ever. So we get too excited about the good things and too depressed about the bad things. The philosophers say, just calm down. You'll be in a place of inner peace. You'll be in a place of power. You'll be able to deal with anything that comes your way. So first of all, don't rush to judgment. Secondly, value the right things. One reason people get so worked up and worried about changes that come their way is that they're valuing too highly things like predictability, normalcy. But we should value growth and learning, sometimes above all, because only when we do that can we develop the way we're here on this earth to develop. Can organizations be limber and agile and creative? And they say, number three, use your imagination well. We've all had experiences where the imagination goes out of control and we just start spinning out all these worst case scenarios that we're not just preparing for in case they happen. We almost start believing that the worst is going to happen. Einstein once said imagination is more important than knowledge. So if we can help people with their imaginations during a time of disruption, during a time of uncertainty, a time of change, we regain the power to do the right things. That's just an example, the art of self-control. And then I talk about the art of positive action, because once you've established this peace within, once you're able to say, okay, let's just all be calm about this, let's see what we can do. You want to govern your attitudes, look for opportunities, and take initiative. Secondly, the art of positive action has three rules as well, right? You've got to think about attitudes in the organization, in yourself. You got to govern those well, because bad attitudes often lead to bad results. Better attitudes open people up for looking at the opportunities. Any time of change is like a kaleidoscope being spun, right? New things will open up. Some doors will be closed, but other doors will open. Too many people go into the duck and cover mode and don't even try to look around to see, okay, of the stuff that's new that's going on, what's an open door that we can go through and do some exciting new things? And then lastly, in the art of positive action, the philosophers say take initiative, because in times of change, again, when a lot of people freeze, it's those who take some initiative who end up being better off than they were before. Ralph Waldo Emerson, our great American philosopher 150 years ago, said, life is experiment. We should always be making experiments. They won't all work, but you can learn from every experiment you make. Successful people take initiative in times of change. They make experiments, and that often leads to something really great.
Yeah, and I've often heard a term that it's easier to steer a moving car than a car that is static on the side of the road, which again is that idea of let's take initiative, let's move.
Yeah.
And even if the environment is murky in front of us, let's at least make some steps forward for a couple of reasons. Number one, we may very well discover what is next and enable that transformation. But number two, what it does is it enables us to really invest the energy of our employees, of our people, who otherwise can be in status quo and be a bit nervous about it. It's a way of bleeding off some of that energy and using it quite productively as well.
Yeah, that's very wise, Bill. I mean, we set new goals in times of change, not to lock us into those goals, but to get us moving in a direction where we can learn what we need to do. You're exactly right. It's only in motion. It's only while moving forward that we learn the kind of things that we're really going to need. So setting wise goals doesn't mean we're not going to revise those goals as we go and learn. It's just to get everybody engaged. And the Stoic philosophers made a really good point. You learn how to ignore the things you can't control and focus on the things you can control. And when you do that well, you begin to expand that circle.
In the second part of the book, you talk about the art of imagination, and the subtitle is How to Make and Sell Great Lemonade. Give us a couple of nuggets of wisdom from that as well. I'm a resilient leader. Yeah. I'm experiencing all this radical change, particularly in today's market and in today's environment. What are a couple of nuggets of wisdom that I should be taking in terms of innovating for success and innovating for value?
The stuff we talk about, like resilience and grit and alchemy, we tend to right away think of it as individual stuff I've got to do within my own heart and mind, and good luck to me. I've really found that we need to surround ourselves with other people, right? We need each other to give each other hope, right? We need each other to give each other courage. We need each other for so many things that it takes for being transformative. I learned this oddly enough in the Harry Potter stories that I read years ago. J.K. Rowling was a classics major in college and studied a lot of philosophy and builds into her stories a lot of wisdom from the great philosophers that show how we can lead change in our time. First of all, prepare for the journey. Secondly, surround yourself with support for the individual and the organization. Focus on what's at stake. Don't focus on what the danger is. Focus on what values are at stake here, and then take appropriate action. There are these little things that great fictional characters who turn out to be heroic almost always do. And in our time, if we want to play the heroic role in times of challenge, we learn to prepare. Surround yourself with other people who can champion, your cause. Engage in positive communications, positive self-talk for the organization. Focus on what's at stake, the values that are at stake, and then take good action together. These things we've read about since the oldest human epics. In fact, the oldest epic we have is the Epic of Gilgamesh. It's a story about a bad leader who becomes a good leader. And one of the main elements of the story is some partnership that's engaged in, and how that works and how that doesn't work. The power of partnership in the Iliad, the power of partnership when it's not used well. In Beowulf, you go through the range of Western literature, and you can get this in Eastern philosophy as well. We need to do the difficult things, the tough things, and the wonderful things together. And if we learn how to partner with other people, trusting other people, providing them with the information they need, letting them know we're in this together, we spark everybody's imaginations and can make incredibly good things happen.
Tom, you also mentioned in Plato's Lemonade Stand 4 really important insights that come not only from ancient philosophers, but medieval philosophers as well. Insight number 1 was the wisdom of Socrates about self-knowledge. Yeah. Describe to our listeners how important that self-knowledge is for us as resilient leaders.
This was Socrates' theme song. The unexamined life is not worth living. Know thyself. It had been inscribed in marble at the Oracle at Delphi, the holiest spot in ancient Greece. It was probably first said by Thales, who was one of the wealthiest people in the ancient world, as well as being wise. It was said by Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. But for Socrates, it was the hit he kept coming back to. You got to know yourself. You got to know yourself. Why? I have a friend who's an executive coach to a lot of top business people. And he says that so many of the problems he was brought early on in his career as an executive coach, he came to realize he was helping people deal with their problems piecemeal. Here's how you deal with this. Here's how you deal with that. And finally, he realized, you know what? All these problems were coming from a lack of self-awareness and a lack of self-management. To know yourself and manage yourself well will help you to avoid most of the problems you'll otherwise be worried about. So, how do we deal with change? Well, if you don't know really who you are and what you truly value, if you don't know yourself well, you can't prepare yourself well to deal with change, especially disruptive change. Now, self-knowledge, a lot of people thought that's just, well, how can that be hard, right? Because, to know what's going on in Alpha Centauri is quite a challenge. To know what's going on in the quantum level of reality is quite a challenge. But to know your own self, that's the closest thing to you, right? It's you. There's no distance. It's got to be easy. Well, the wisest philosophers have said, no, it's the hardest. It's the hardest of all, because we're all masters at self-deception. We're masters of self-delusion. We're masters at telling ourselves what we'd like to believe rather than telling ourselves the truth about ourselves. So you need to go through a process of self-examination that's not just sitting alone in your room and sort of introspecting, but asking other people, questions about how they perceive your actions, your reactions, your emotion, and listening to what people are trying to tell you. I've known a lot of leaders who just, bulls in the china shop. They're sort of rushing through life, not listening to anybody. I've come to think of listening as a spiritual discipline. Done well, it could be transformative. Listening well to others is a key to self-knowledge, and that is a key to self-preparation for anything we face. So that's why it was such a big deal to Socrates, I think.
Right. Well, and I think of the quote from Blaise Pascal, the philosopher and the mathematician, who basically said that in his view, the root of all evil was the inability of people to sit alone by themselves in a room, i.e., we fill our days up and our times up with all this stuff around us. And what it's doing is it's avoiding the very, very hard and painful work of self-awareness that you just mentioned.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Blaise Pascal, 1623 to 1662. In his time, he was talking about how we're distraction and diversion just rules our lives, right? And what would he say now with people scrolling their phones constantly? I told you so is probably what he would say. But he wanted us to take the time we need for ourselves. And that even though self-knowledge is not a wholly solo adventure, we need time of quiet and time alone to process what the world is trying to teach us.
Right. And solitude, the quieting the body, quieting the mind, quieting the spirit in order to have that time.
Absolutely.
It also reminds me, one of my other favorite philosophers is Bruce Springsteen, who said, it's a sad man, my friend, who's living in his own skin and can't stand the company. So that's kind of, it's another flip side of self-awareness.
I think the best philosophers are people who live life on all sorts of levels. You quoted Pascal. Pascal said we live on 3 levels: the physical, the intellectual, and the spiritual. The physical level is all about the body. You should live on that level. Get exercise. Enjoy your body. Enjoy being a bodied creature in the world. But don't forget the intellectual. Enjoy ideas. Enjoy thought. But don't forget the spiritual, what Pascal called the heart. Love, compassion, unity with other people. If we're living on all 3 of those levels, and you think about somebody like Bruce Springsteen, he's been a power in music because he lives on all 3 levels.
No, it's a great point. Tom, there's a few other insights that you talk about. The second one is from Plato, and it talks about ideals. Help us to understand how Plato's teaching on ideals and the theory of forms, et cetera, applies to us as leaders today.
It's funny because Plato had this idea that the world is a lot like a kaleidoscope. And those of us who just focus on the physical world, and that's all we ever think about, things are constantly changing. I mean, Heraclitus said that in 500 BCE. Heraclitus said everything is always changing. If we just focus on that, we're going to just be confused, right? We're going to be spinning around all the time. So Plato thought that we need to rise above the constant churn and turmoil of the physical world and find those ideals that apply no matter what the changes are, like justice, right? Like truth. If we can latch onto these ideals, and Kierkegaard, centuries later, had this great image in one of his edifying discourses. Soren Kierkegaard, often called the father of existentialism. Kierkegaard said, sailors at sea bounce around with all kinds of waves. Don't just stare at the waves. They look up at the heavens. They look at the stars. They don't just look at what's constantly changing. They look at the things that never change to get their guidance. That's what Plato was talking about. We should have ideals. Socrates, his teacher, was all about self-knowledge. Plato thought that was very important too. But in addition to knowing ourselves, we should latch on to eternal values, those ideals that never change, that can give us a place to stand, that can give us the guidance and guardrails we need for everything we do. And his wisdom has echoed through the centuries. I think it was Jimmy Carter in his inaugural address as president quoted his high school teacher who said, during changing times, we must take our stand on unchanging principles. That was Plato.
Well, and even at the outset of the podcast, I talked about resilient leadership not being a destination, but being a journey.
Yes.
When you think about ideals themselves are also that destination, right, Tom?
Right.
And it's the journey for us as leaders. We're not necessarily going to get to those ideals, right. But the key is the journey toward those ideals, the journey toward a North Star that becomes so important, not just for us individually, but especially for our organizations, right?
Yeah, that's right. Every ideal is supposed to send us on an adventure of growth and improvement. Nobody's going to be perfectly just. Nobody's going to have all and only true beliefs. These things are probably not attainable in this world, but we can move in their direction and thereby improve ourselves as individuals. We can improve our organizations. If we seek justice, if we seek truth, seek beauty, right? Seek goodness. We're never going to embody these things perfectly, but the efforts themselves make everything better.
Yeah. Are we seeing some of those ideals emerging today in business around diversity, equity, and inclusion, yes, and climate and planet sustainability, et cetera? Is that a reflection of seeking now for some of those ideals that we're either discovering anew or embracing?
Yeah, always love the old Winston Churchill quote. You can always depend on Americans to do the right thing once they've exhausted every other possibility. Having tried everything else, people are now turning new attention to certain ideals that have been neglected in the past. Right? We got so busy with what we were doing. We got so narrowly focused. We were forgetting certain things that were very important in their own right. And now people are waking up to those things. And again, we make progress in fits and starts, and there's nobody perfectly embodying any of these ideals yet. It's a struggle to get there, but it's a worthy struggle. It's a struggle in the right direction. And I think we will see all kinds of unexpected positive consequences of the attempt that people are beginning to make. You know, it used to be, we thought that business was one thing, life was something else, right? I wear one hat at work, another hat at home, people used to say to me long ago. I say, yeah, but you wear them on the same head. The things that we value in our personal lives, we need to value those things at work too, because the people we work with have genuinely human needs. It's the human spirit. And if we can get people focused on the right things, the right values, the right ideals, they bring a new passion to everything we're doing together.
Yeah, well, and that importance of having the same ideals and values at home and at work is really, really important, because when that's happening, you have integration.
Yes.
When it doesn't happen, it is the definition of disintegration.
Right. Absolutely right. You have terrible dysfunction, and people are half-hearted about what they're doing. You don't get the full heart invested. People have started to talk more than ever about purpose and the kind of passion that true purpose can create. And again, when these things aren't just used as buzzwords, they're not just flags we run up the flagpole, but they're things we truly believe in. And when we start talking in leadership positions about these things with real vulnerability, like, I want you to know my sense of purpose, but I want to know yours as well. And I want to come up with something that we can all fight for together, that we can all bring to the world together. People are really invested in it, you know, and we've known for a long time, you can't keep the best people just based on salary and benefits and things like that. The best people want to do something they really believe in. And so when leaders can lay out a vision that encompasses these ideals, that it encompasses these values that people have in their personal lives as well as in their professional lives, that unleashes such positive power.
Right. So the third insight comes from Aristotle, and it's the virtue of courage.
Yeah.
And as I've heard what you've been talking about before in this reaching for ideals,
yes,
there are always boundaries, there are always barriers, there are people and organizations and systems working against you. So what did Aristotle teach us about the role of courage as resilient leaders walking through these moments of change?
Aristotle was, of course, Plato's star student, and he was really, he was taken with this whole notion of, you know, there are things that we need to have as guides in the world. And so he started talking about the virtues, which the Greek word was arete, and it means a strength. And then the Latin virtu gives us our English word virtue, and it meant prowess or power or strength. So for Aristotle, the virtues are just the strengths or powers that we bring to any challenging situation. Virtues like honesty, for example. We can't deal with challenges well unless we search for truth, unless we're open to truth. We grasp onto the truth and we share the truth. Honesty with yourself, honesty with those around you. But, you know, Aristotle realized that of all the virtues, if we don't have the virtue of courage, first and foremost, we won't act in accordance with any of the other virtues when times are tough or pressure looms. There's a danger or a risk, because there are circumstances aplenty where somebody wants to tell his boss the truth, but he's afraid to, right? And he needs to have the courage to explain what's going on, to share what he's seeing. So many CEOs suffer from the very thing that actually, there's an ancient story written by one of Socrates' the star students, not Plato, but Xenophon, who was a military man, a man of practical action. And he wrote a little story about a local leader and a poor poet visits him and he says, "Oh man, it must be great to be, leader of a whole nation, to be a monarch. It must be amazing." And he says, "You want to know what it's like, really? People never tell you what you need to know. They tell you what they think you want to know." Now, that's the CEO problem in a nutshell, right?
And that was 2,500 years ago.
Yeah, it's being talked about in the ancient world. Some things never change. So yeah, courage is not just a thing for people on the front lines of a protest, and courage is something for everyday life. And Aristotle really emphasized our need to be brave, to bring courage to everything we do. That alone would revolutionize a lot of organizational life.
When you talked earlier, too, about resilient leaders casting visions of where the organization's going, how you get through COVID and pandemics and crises and wars by looking to the future. It takes courage to stay the course when it's not apparent that vision is emerging, right?
It does, right. And that's another way to understand how courage is a broader concept than we typically think, right? It's not just that kind of extreme situation, but the everyday pressures and challenges and setbacks and the risks and dangers we confront in our day-to-day. That's where courage needs to be brought. And in fact, a very wise philosopher I know once, he said to me about his students, he said, "If I don't help my students get it right in the little things, they'll never get it right in the big things." And I think that really applies to being courageous. And I think we as leaders need to reward people for showing courage in small ways to prepare them for when it's needed to show courage in big ways as well.
Right. And then we get to the fourth insight. And when you consider the complexity of the world today, and you can't open a magazine or talk to a senior leader without talking about the fact that they're trying to lead through the most complex times ever. Yeah. The thing that becomes so important is Occam and his nose for the simple essence that makes up your fourth insight. So tell us a little bit about that contrast between complexity and simplicity.
Yeah, a lot of people have heard of Socrates and Plato and Aristotle, and not as many people know about William of Ockham. He's one of my medieval philosophers I like to go to because he was really the first person I'm aware of who seemed to theoretically understand the importance of simplicity, the power of simplicity, the connection between simplicity and truth, and simplicity and power. So that you have scientists in most of the specialties these days who follow Occam in thinking, okay, the simplest hypothesis is often the truest and the most powerful hypothesis. We complicate things needlessly. And Occam sort of preached against that. Don't multiply complications, he was saying. Needless complexity distracts attention. Needless complexity disperses energy. In every situation, however complicated it looks, Occam seemed to believe there's a simple essence. And the most successful people learn to find that simple core of what can look like a complicated problem to everybody else. And once they find that simple core, that simple essence, they're in a position of power to not just worry about the periphery, right? Not just worry about the symptoms of the problem, which could be very complicated, but to get to the core where you're going to be able to find the cure. So I think simplicity is absolutely crucial for leaders. And in fact, I've even seen that there's a death of accountability when organizations pass a certain threshold of complexity and don't also work hard at breaking things down so that people know the simplicity of their ultimate basic responsibilities and relationships with each other. So Occam, it's almost like he anticipated all of modern life in all its convoluted complexity by bringing our attention to the eternal value of simplicity. Whenever I've worked with executives on finding the simple essence of their situation, of their problem, of the disruption they're facing, it's always, again, a liberating thing.
Do you just give us one example of a business problem that you've worked with a client that appeared to be very complex on the surface, and how did you help the senior leader get down to that simple essence as Occam taught us?
Well, a lot of the complexity comes from often comes from rumor, comes from speculation, comes from constantly wanting to get more information. Right. So we're dealing with a problem. Let's say it's a customer, a marketplace problem. It's a customer related problem. And you're wanting to, the executive is wanting to get as much information as you can to figure out how to solve the problem. But more information means more complication, because not everybody's going to tell him the same thing is what's wrong. Right. This is what we think is wrong. That's what we think is wrong. And so the complexities build up. Right. Listening to many voices can be a very good and powerful thing, but only when you use it well. Remember earlier we talked about the principle of functionality, right? How does a chorus of voices function in our decision making, right? Do we stay with listening to all the details, or do we try to get behind what the different people are saying and why they might be saying it? That's often a key to simplicity. In a number of situations I've seen senior executives face, they ask what, and they try to get straight to the how are we going to deal with this without using the prime philosophical question of why. Why are we hearing what we're hearing? Why are people saying these different things? They're saying very different things. It's a complicated situation. If you just listen to the chorus of voices we're hearing from right now, all our customers are saying this and this and this and this and this. Why is any of this being said? What could be behind it all, right? And it's only when you start asking the why question that you start shrinking the funnel and getting to what might be the core problem. So again, it's an amazing thing, Bill, that we as philosophers came up with this question, right? That it's behind not only philosophy, but it ends up being behind all of the sciences. Because what if nobody had ever asked why about a natural phenomenon? Right? Suppose nobody had ever asked why about lightning, right? Well, I suppose nobody had ever asked why about the growth of plants. We wouldn't have the sciences we have now. Same thing is true in organizational life. The most powerful question is the why question. Whether we're starting with that to get the purpose of the organization laid out very clearly, or whether we're using that as one of our primary tools to deal with cacophony in the voices we're hearing and the complexity and chaos that kicks up. So I think the powerful question of why, if it functions well, again, the principle we're talking about, how does it function in our organization? Then you can deal with all the what you're hearing, and you can move much better and effectively toward the how you need to deal with the situation.
Great. It sounds like it's also an opportunity to channel our inner 2-year-old, right? Going back full circle to why that we hear from our children and our grandchildren, right?
Absolutely. In fact, one of Aristotle's most quoted lines is philosophy begins in wonder. And a lot of people, they don't even know what wonder is anymore, right? But it's like you're out in the night sky and there's this blaze of stars above you, and it can evoke this sense of wonderment. And the way the sciences got started is that wonderment was turned into practical curiosity. And in corporate life, it's hard to say that I've come across a more important quality than the quality of curiosity, because really, we talked about courage, but when those two are combined, when curiosity and courage are combined, some amazing things happen. I mean, think, for example, about the ancient myth of Pandora's box that everybody's heard of. So Pandora was given a gift box with the instruction she wasn't supposed to open it, which on the surface of it seems to make no sense at all. But in the Greek, it wasn't a big box. It was a big jar. That maybe the lid was just ornamental. It was just to be, visually enjoyed and not opened. But Pandora had this more than normal curiosity, right? So she opens this jar. And what happens? Well, if you've heard, anybody's heard the story, know that all the evils that we now know of came pouring out of the jar and dispersed around the world. Well, Pandora has more curiosity than most people, because after having that happen, most people would just get as far from that jar as they could. She wants to look into the jar a second time. So she has not only curiosity, real curiosity, she has courage. Because now to be curious, it requires courage, because look what the curiosity led to just a minute ago, right? So she goes back to the jar, with curiosity and courage and looks in it again and finds that one thing did not fly out of the jar. One thing was left behind. One thing stuck. And that thing, we're told, was hope. I've seen organizational contexts in which if those three qualities are encouraged, curiosity, courage, and hope, then people are empowered to do amazing things together. And again, we're going back thousands of years from myth that's been available to us. We probably all heard it as kids, but we haven't really meditated on the story and the way that Pandora's qualities of curiosity, courage, and then hope can make all the difference we need in times of change, in times of uncertainty.
Well, Tom, this has been a fascinating discussion. We're going to go through some quick rapid fire questions. Dust Jacket refers to you as the world's happiest philosopher. Tell us about that.
Well, you know, it's funny because philosophy's got this bad reputation, right? I used to tell my graduate students at Notre Dame, I used to say, look, philosophy is serious business, but serious isn't the same thing as somber. You know, we can have fun doing it. I mean, Socrates would sometimes crack me up with the things he would say. Kierkegaard, I've mentioned him. He could be very funny. We can be playful. Some of the best physics departments in the country are places where people have a spirit of fun, a spirit of play. There's an old Hindu proverb. If when you're working, you can't tell whether it's work or play, then you're doing it right. Right. So I'm a happy philosopher because I play with ideas all the time. The kid in me gets to come out in this very adult activity with all the wonder, with all the curiosity that you were just saying. Our kids show us all the time. I get to still do that. So why wouldn't I be happy about it? Plus, I continually discover ideas that help people in their lives. And that's something to be pretty happy about too.
Oh, totally. Who is your favorite philosopher and why?
Oh, in so many ways, it's Aristotle because, you know, he wasn't perfect. He had some attitudes and beliefs that were of his time that we wish he had been able to get over. But he did see the solution to so many human problems. And he's not easy to read because his books weren't written to be popular books. They were his lecture notes for his most advanced students. So you're going to go to Aristotle's Politics and get so many great ideas, like the pinnacle of every human achievement is a simple formula. These are my words, but his ideas. People in partnership for a shared purpose. If you take that simple formula, people, plural, in partnership, a certain kind of relationship for a shared purpose with a certain kind of ideal, then that's the kind of formula for doing really amazing things in life. But you got to read 300 pages to figure out that that's what he's saying. So he would be one of my two contenders. And the other contender would be Seneca, who was a Roman lawyer, a prominent lawyer of his day. And in his time, you read the letters and moral essays of Seneca, especially the letters he wrote to a younger lawyer named Lucilius. It's called just Letters to Lucilius. He gives him advice about life, success and failure and happiness and anger and what the crowd tells you. Should you listen to other people or when should you not, and go your own way? It's almost like he writes with a certain contemporary currency. You think this guy, this is like a guy who lives down the street from me. He's not a guy who lived hundreds of years ago. So it would be between Aristotle and Seneca. But for the practical side of things, I might have to give Seneca the edge. And yet, if you let me pick three, it'd be Aristotle, Pascal, and Seneca.
You've really covered the gamut in terms of time frame as well, because you're spanning about 2,000 years of amazing thinking there.
That's right. If you let me even come to the present day, I'd have to include you.
Tom, I would definitely include you. So what are you talked about curiosity a minute ago. So last question, what are you the most curious about? And therefore, what's your next book about?
Oh, yeah. I'm curious, really curious about, and I mentioned before that people were asking me 2 years ago about how to deal with disruptive change. And people are asking me now how to deal with uncertainty. I am really curious about how uncertainty becomes a problem, since it is the the water in which we fish swim every day. It's the air in which we birds fly every day. And yet all of a sudden, people are really worried about it. So I'm super curious about how uncertainty has functioned in human life, in the sweep of human history, about the different kinds of uncertainty there are. There's everyday uncertainty, right? We don't worry about that typically. I'm not out in my front yard saying, oh, what's going to come down the street next? But we don't know what's going to happen in the next minute, in the next hour, but we typically don't worry about it. That's everyday uncertainty. There's enhanced uncertainty, which would be like during the pandemic, right? You understand this is not normal, right? So people are worried. And there's what I would call extreme uncertainty. You can separate out everyday, enhanced, and extreme and see how people best deal with all three. I'm really curious about that. I'm really curious about how uncertainty and hope connect up. I'm interested in how uncertainty and failure connects up. So as a philosopher, my next project that I get ready to write, actually I'm going to start in about a week or two on a short book on this, is how uncertainty can actually be not a threat, but a gift in our lives if we use it well.
Mm. Well, and Tom, just to summarize that, as you were going through that description, and I think back to the incredible conversation that we've had here, and I think about the subtitle of Plato's Lemonade Stand, stirring change into something great, and you have absolutely done that for us on the podcast. So, Tom, I just sincerely thank you for being with us, for being a guest, for imparting not only your wisdom, but sharing the wisdom of 2,500 or 3,000 years and showing us as resilient leaders how we can leverage ancient wisdom and still apply it to today's issues, today's problems, and today's opportunities. So, Dr. Tom Morris, thank you for being on Becoming Resilient.
Oh, thank you, Bill. You're such a wise host. I want to have my own podcast just so I can have you on as a guest.
Thank you for the compliment. That's a deal. Tom, thank you very much for such a thought-provoking conversation. You've given us a lot to think about. For example, that resilience is not just bouncing back, but is actually bouncing forward. I also love the insight from William of Ockham that the simplest hypothesis is often the truest and the most powerful. What a great challenge and reminder to us as resilient leaders that finding that simple essence helps us to better lead in our own organizations. And you also told us that we get to that essence by asking the simple but powerful question, why, often several times to peel away the other layers. And we need to ask why before we can effectively get to the what and to the how. Well, we've covered a lot on today's episode. For more about Tom Morris and our other podcast resources, visit Deloitte.com/becoming resilient. If you're curious about how other leaders are navigating their paths to becoming resilient, I encourage you to visit our Global Resilience Hub at Deloitte.com/resilience. Before I sign off, I welcome your feedback. We'd love to hear from you about topics of interest and inspirational leaders. Find me on LinkedIn to share your ideas. Until next time, stay curious, find those connections, and continue your journey of becoming resilient.